Welcome to the Better Than Bitter podcast. Today we are meeting with Michael Conticelli. This is episode 30. Michael is a certified divorce financial analyst. He also is a collaborative strategist. He has been a certified divorce financial analyst since 2003, guides individuals through the financial complexities of divorce, and he provides clarity and confidence on how you are going to move forward. With over 30 years in financial planning and investment advisory experience, including a background as a New York State divorce mediator, Michael brings both depth and empathy to the divorce process. And it's so exciting that Michael has a mediation background because so many CDFAs really do only come from the financial aspect. But having a mediator by your side in this process is going to really bring you incredible results. His expertise span from property division, tax implications, income analysis, and long-term financial planning. Michael is based in Florida, but continues to support clients with a collaborative, solution-focused approach designed to protect your financial futures during and after divorce. His website is mysolutionsdivorce.com. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Pleasure to be here today.
Great. So again, this is so incredible that you come from a mediation background because I really do notice a real difference in, working with CDFAs who are strictly financial advisors and one who really understand conflict resolution because, the divorce process it can be very high conflict. And even if we want an amicable divorce resolution, during the process of negotiation, during the time of division of assets, it can be highly charged and highly charged with a lot of emotions. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you went from mediation into the financial advisory role and kind of what that kind of outcome looks or what that partnership looks like for clients.
Well, my start was basically, it was kind of the opposite. I was in financial advisory, and then I had started working with a local dispute resolution center. And what I did was I started with a community mediation. I was helping out doing court mediations, and I moved into the divorce, into the family law, got certified in New York, and they had a great model up there. It was mediation. So I always worked with a female attorney, so it was gender neutral. We didn't want them to feel like they were getting kind of ganged up on. And it was nice because you had the attorney there talking about all the legal aspects as we worked through the mediation. And then I was there as the lay mediator, they would say, but I was covering the financial aspects of it. So between the two of us, it was really giving them, two very important sides of the process of moving through the divorce and getting to those agreements because a lot of people when they think about divorce they're just they think about need to see an attorney. It's a legal process, but as you mentioned, it's so much more than that. It's really kind of the three things are the legal, the financial, and the big one everybody forgets about is the emotional that covers intersects across all of that. And my financial background just kind of, I want to say they kind of drug me into that role there. And that was, I think, kind of really at the very beginning. Don't quote me on this, but collaborative law when it was really just starting to kind of take a foothold. This was back in, like I said, the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah, so I think that collaborative is a really interesting approach, and I'm part of the Vested Divorce Concierge Group, and we consider what we do like the little C of collaborative, meaning that we all work very collaboratively in a hub environment. So we have all the different professionals that can work together, and we have history of working together. But yet, the true collaborative is that you need to be licensed as a collaborative attorney. You need to be licensed as a collaborative coach. You're signing an actual agreement saying that you will reach an agreement. And if you do not, and it has to go into litigation, you have to start all over.
Wow.
So real collaborative is great because it's fast. It's just very expensive on a per hour basis because you have all of the professionals all in the same room together. But yet, to me, even though it sounds really expensive, at the end of the day, you're still going to have all those hours of all those professionals anyway. It's just compacted in terms of time. So I think it's so great that there was also this idea of gender neutral. I actually haven't really heard that there had been a real initiative to say, like, okay, we want to make sure we have a male and a female supporting this couple because it's important for them to not believe that the male's going to side with the male and the female's going to side with the female. So can we talk a little bit more about that? Because is that widespread? Is that just where you were? And like, what do you believe the importance is as people begin to create their divorce support group, like to be thinking about things like
I think I have not, kind of like you said, aside from that instance there, I have not seen it really practiced. And probably, I mean, there was an expense factor too, right? You've got two people in the room, like you were saying. But I think it really, I mean, personalities are going to overcome that. But especially in the very beginning, you've got to think these people are coming into that room. They're nervous, they're anxious, they're, angry, sad. Every emotion is running through. And a lot of times, and you've probably heard, because I still hear it today, you hear people, they feel like someone's ganging up on them. And that's really what they tried to avoid. Even in my own practice, what I've started doing now is bringing, which I never used to do, but I've started bringing my wife into especially the initial consultations and what that does. And she doesn't have the same depth of financial background even that I have, but what it does is it brings a certain, just kind of balances things out a little bit. And you're going kind of playing off of one another a little bit where, there's certain things that I may not be getting or she's picking up on, so I think it helps. I don't think it's necessary, but I really think it kind of brings a little bit extra to the
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I mean, in my divorce process, our certified divorce financial analyst was a woman. We had hired her as a neutral, meaning that she was looking at how we can divide assets in an equitable way that's going to work for both of us. But yet my ex shook his head and was like, I don't need her support. So she really ended up just working with me. And then our mediator was a woman, but, I think that it has to do more with, the person you're divorcing to figure out if that really matters or not. We did not feel like there was a gender bias, in mediation. And I hired a woman lawyer just to look over the mediated agreement. He hired a male attorney just to look over the agreement. So it really, I think it does. It may matter for some if you believe that there might be some influence there, but I really do believe it's the divorce professionals that you hire and their ability to stay neutral, which is most important.
yeah, absolutely. And not just neutral, but I think there's things that, like I've been divorced myself, so I've been through it, but my divorce was, I don't want to say any divorce is easy, but there were no children involved. It was very early in the marriage, so there weren't a whole lot of assets, so I can draw on some of those things. But, a lot of times, and I'll tell my clients this, I'm sitting down with them and I understand, I can empathize with them, but I just truly I don't get exactly where they are. Like I understand it, but I've never felt it. So there's a little bit of that, I want to say, lack of connectivity there, which is good for me on the financial side, where I think in a lot of cases, and I've noticed, like, especially with bringing my wife in more recently, she's a little bit more in tune to some of those non-financial, the concerns, the fears, especially when the children are involved. Like, can't understand, I can say I understand, I can read everything about it, I can learn, but the feelings that a mother has, when they've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, they're in the middle of a divorce and they're thinking about the impact and what this is having. I'm looking at it from a dad's perspective, not from, a mom's perspective. So not even in terms of fairness, but I think it brings, like I said, I'll use the word balance sometimes. And sometimes it's like I said, I've done it for better than 20 years, literally by myself. But what we're really trying to do is not just kind of like cover that emotional part of it, which, that's not my strong point, obviously. And this is why we need more professionals. We need somebody to come in there and cover that, where the coaching would come in and actually deal with some of those issues that aren't just truly financial. So it's truly covering all the bases there. They've got their legal covered. My focus is really on the financial, but we've also got to make sure some of those fears and emotional needs are taken care of as well.
So many times, so I obviously talk to a lot of individuals getting divorced. And when I recommend that they start their process, not just with a coach, but they start their process with a certified divorce financial analyst, they'll be like, oh, I don't have that kind of money. Or, like, yeah, we own a house, we have some Ks, we got some life insurance, but yet, like, we don't really need a whole certified divorce financial analyst to be able to help us divide our assets. And so I know that you said that you actually work with those people a lot, meaning that like that middle, socioeconomic individual who might not think they need it, but they do need it. And, why should people really consider this as an option? Because again, it's not something that people know exists. I didn't know it existed. And does it really matter at what stage should people, like with what they have to divide, at what stage should they be like, yeah, we definitely should get a CDFA in here? Like when you say like your intake, like who's your ideal customer as a starting?
I would say as early on in the process as possible. We could technically say after we say I do. You want to start thinking, even with a prenup, a lot of people think it's a recipe to fail, but it's kind of setting the stage. So I've had a lot of people come to me just thinking about divorce that they don't go through with it, but they just need to sit down because one of the values is we know the process, we understand the finances, we can look at all the implications, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So by sitting down, you're talking to someone, you're kind of running through the scenario. This is my situation. Am I going to be okay if I do this? And sometimes they need to hear that, like, yeah, you're going to be okay. So I think part of it is really kind of almost like getting that second opinion on where am I? I think I'm good with this. I think everything's going in the right place. This is my plan. And then the second part is a lot of people go into divorce willingly or not blindly. And they don't know what to expect in the process. And it's like, okay, well, what do you mean I need to stay? I don't know where that was kept. I don't know where this is, or how do I find that? So a lot of times if you're coming in, you're talking to someone and it's like, okay, guess what? These are going to be all the things that you're going to need. What that enables you to do is actually prepare for the divorce. So you can go in there and say, like, okay, well, wait a second. Do I have copies of my tax statements? How do I get those? What are the credit cards that we're using? Let me look through these bank statements. What's going on? And sometimes, especially if you're a non-financial spouse, you're not aware of a lot of these things. You're just, I don't know, everything's taken care of. The bills are paid. We make enough money. Everything's done. You're not looking into those details. So it kind of gives you time to organize and prepare. So when you have to fill out those financial affidavits, when you're sitting down with the lawyer, they're asking you questions, you'll probably save more money because you'll be more organized. And the way I try to make it very accessible, my fees are on the low side. I charge $150 an hour, but on an as needed basis, so you can think about it. I've got a lot of clients that'll come in and just want to organize everything. It may only take a session or two. And it's like, okay, I've got this. A lot of times maybe they'll come back right before mediation as the settlements are going through. Let's run through some numbers. But the sooner you start thinking about it, it's kind of like getting like a temperature check on your finances and, okay, what's next? How do I prepare for this?
Your pricing strategy is really interesting because a lot of CDFAs charge kind of a flat fee, whether it be 3, 4, 5,000. And obviously that backs out into an hourly rate, but for all intents and purposes, they have done it enough that they know what the cost is going to be. And that's what they put down as the retainer, but you still pay that amount of money. It's not like they're going to give you money back, if you don't use the hours. But it's interesting because this really does allow for all different individuals to be able to get support. Again, I think what I was trying to get to was who's the ideal customer, and who should consider adding a CDFA into their mix, right? So if I don't own a house and I'm just renting, I'm an hourly wage worker. And I might have a car, but I don't have life insurance. And I get medical insurance. Maybe the medical insurance is something you get from your spouse who has a salaried position. So that would be a trigger to say, yeah, I need to bring in a CDFA into the mix here.
I would argue it may not even be a trigger of assets because, even in this scenario you talked about, there may not be a whole lot to divide up. But obviously, you're going through such a transition that things are going to change. Your life is going to change. You're used to one budget, that budget's coming over to something else. You maybe got hourly. A lot of times you're talking about, even can that career continue? Am I going to have to change my career because now I'm in a completely different scenario? So I would say that, assets may not even be part of the equation because you're going on a financial reset. So you're literally going to go from two incomes working together to one income working together. There may or not be kids involved. So what you're talking about is everything's going to change in a big, big way. And if you're not prepared for that and you haven't projected and you haven't thought about it, even if your divorce is going to go okay, well, okay, how are your finances going to be? Like, what's going to happen? Are you going to be able, where are you going to be a year from now, 2 years from now? What's the plan going forward? So I would argue that, even in that situation, there's definitely value. And then the organization part, you need to get everything together. A lot of people, and I was just at a family law seminar last week, and some of the judges were speaking, and it was for pro bono attorneys, and they were literally begging some of the attorneys to take on pro bono cases. Some of these judges, actually, many of them were saying they're seeing 50 pro se people representing themselves cases a month. So these are people going in there with no legal representation. So they've got no financial, and they were talking about the struggles because you're just not on the same page. Like you don't need for the whole, duration. And that's why I don't use the retainer model because I don't necessarily need to carry someone through the entire year and a half, 2 year process. I want someone to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about doing this. This is what's going on. And they can kind of pop in, work on some strategies. And obviously, it's going to be even less expensive the more they do. I've got clients that come to me and everything's very well organized, but they don't know finances the same way. Like they don't know, they may not be able to read these statements or look at a tax return and pick up on some things like, oh, hey, what is this? This represents an asset that I don't see listed anywhere in these documents. So you can pick up on things, find red flags and blind spots. Even in that situation where there's no assets involved because there's a big change in finances involved. So that's why I would argue with assets are big, and the higher you go, the higher net worth. A lot of times they're already going to have those professionals lined up. So I would argue it's technically easier for them because, they've got all the professionals. Whereas you come down market and you talk about the mid market, just your kind of everyday people, a lot of times, they don't have, their regular attorney. They, maybe preparing their taxes themselves or just using a tax. They don't have that CPA and that financial advisor lined up yet. Or a big thing is these financial professionals a lot of times are aligned with a particular spouse. How many times are they sitting in a meeting and they're ignored? One person's handling everything, and they're like, well, that's not my relationship.
Yeah. So, what I hear you saying is that from a CDFA perspective, there's a couple of different roles that individual CPAs CDFAs might be available to provide. One is that if you're in that mid market and you just are needing support as it relates to, oh my gosh, my life financially is about to change, and I need somebody to help me with a budget. I need somebody who's going to say, okay, like this is what you're going to have coming in. Now let's look at what your like monthly, annual, and 30-year out perspective looks like in terms of what your life is going to look like. So you also can be looking at, okay, well, if I want my life to be different, I need to be looking to earn at X. So you plug in future earning potential to kind of show them what their life might look like if they begin to earn more. So obviously their earnings are less coming out of that divorce, but with the intent to grow. Maybe there's an earning capacity evaluation. Maybe they upskill. Maybe they do some stuff. But if it's a really nice plan, meaning that you're like, okay, this is where you are. Let's talk about where you want to be, and how are you going to get there? How much more money would you need to earn in order to live that way that you are hoping to live? And then let's get the support that you need to get there. But here's your financial wealth health, over the next 30 years. The second way is like, if you are somebody that has a ton of assets, and, I was somebody who came in, and between the two of us, like, we had assets, right? My CDFA said, okay, what our goal is here is to slice and dice, come up with a few offers that we could potentially move forward on how to divide all the assets, right? So how could these assets potentially be divided? One person gets the main house, somebody gets a condo, like there's a business, that's included. We've got stocks, we've got this, we've got that, we've got IRAs, we've got Roths, we've got all sorts of retirement, we have investment accounts. Okay. So if you slice and dice this way, this would be equal, an equitable division of assets, but you can also slice and dice this way. And this also would be an equitable division of assets, right? These are two offers that might work. And, if you have a CDFA only working for you and you're looking 30 years out, they can do an evaluation between this offer and that offer, what it might look like, if you hold on to this asset versus that asset. Where's the risk, or if you're going to take on a residence, what kind of risk is that if you don't have the financial means to support that residence? Maybe the interest rates change, maybe it's a balloon, maybe it's a 15-year fix, or maybe it's a variable. So they look at all those things, right? I mean, so there's different ways of using a CDFA. Like you said, there's individuals who are just looking at it as like, how am I going to support myself and stay my livelihood, et cetera? What is it going to look like for me? And what kind of budget do I need to set for myself? And how do I make changes in my lifestyle to meet where I am today? And the other way is like, people with more assets, more information, they need somebody to support them with the offers, meaning like, let's go into mediation with a concrete understanding of the finances and offers. So you have a starting place for negotiation,
Right.
correct?
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. Once the assets are involved, then it becomes, when you've got a decent amount of assets, now you've got all these different settlement options, and each asset with it carries its own characteristics because, you're looking at source of assets, you're looking, tax issues. A lot of times, you'll be like, okay, we plan on dividing it this way. Okay, how is that going to play out? Is that going to play out tax wise? How's that going to play out in the future, projection wise? You brought up a great point. We see a lot of times the marital home is always a difficult one because you've got a couple issues going on there. Number one is, again, one person may want the marital home, but then you start looking at, okay, what's the upkeep going to be? If you get what you want, how's that going to look going forward? Are we going to be able to keep the marital home? Um, and the second part is a lot of times if there's not enough money to do a buyout, then that has to be refinanced. So, okay, now do I have the capacity? You were talking about like interest rates and everything going on, the equity in the home existing, what has to transfer, and then if there's any obligations that you're paying, like, okay, am I going to be able to negotiate a loan to refinance and actually buy this out from my spouse? So even sometimes what you want may not be very likely. And these are the things that you want pointed out early, very early, so you know what you're doing, and the settlement options exactly. Before you go into mediation, you want to have two or three, or more, maybe even I've done as many as four different options, depending on the properties and assets involved to say, okay, this is you know, here's if we just split everything 50-50, just kind of a benchmark, not going to happen, but that's how it would be. And then here's some other options if there's, more than one property involved. Well, what if you take this out? What if you take that house? What if this happens? And then as you go on, you're going to keep updating that. But there's things you think about the basis in the house. You get an exemption, a single exemption, 250 if you sell the house, but if you're married, it's 500. If you've got assets that are, with cost basis in them, when you do a divorce pursuant to a divorce, it's transferred tax free, but you inherit that basis, so that could be something you have to think about down the road. So absolutely. Once the assets get involved, then it becomes more necessary because, the lawyers will do a great job in coming up with an equitable settlement, but without understanding the intricacies, maybe you could have worked it, a little bit better or gotten what you want. And that's really, I always tell my clients, it's your divorce. Once it's over, the judge is done with you, the lawyer's done with you, I'm done with you. We're going to move on with our lives, and you're going to live with, what you come up with. So make sure you're involved, make sure you're part of that negotiation there, because you're the one that has to live with what comes out of this. None of your advisors have to. It's only you.
No, I could just tell a personal story. So I got the family home in my divorce, and it was appraised at a certain dollar value, and that dollar value went into the financial disclosure agreement in terms of what the value of the home was. But it took us, a while to get through our divorce. And in that time, and we had already, drawn a line in the sand, the house went up significant, like a lot, a lot. So my ex is not, of course, happy with the fact that I had got this asset that's worth an extreme amount more than whatever, than what we had, put the line in the sand. But what also happened during that time period is the air conditioning broke. The heater had a crack in it and was leaking carbon monoxide. We had a little bit of mold in the downstairs basement, and I had to get remediated. I had to get all new floors put in. So I have three massive payments that I've had to finance, over the last year that were not part of what I considered inheriting this great family home. So although it appreciated significantly, um, I had all these other expenses. But take into consideration that the home didn't appreciate at that level. I would have gotten stuck with all of those expenses. Originally, my plan was to hold on to the home for 2 additional years when my kids go off to college. And I just recently decided that that's not financially a smart thing for me to do. The market is high in terms of selling. The stock market is low in terms of investing. There's a little bit of instability right now in terms of what's going on in the country. We have no idea if we're heading into a recession. We don't know what's happening with interest rates. And I don't need to be in a big home. Things are breaking, right? And they seem to be breaking. So I just decided to sell. Again, it wasn't the plan, but we also were nesting. So my ex has been 50% in the home for the last so understanding in Massachusetts, if somebody is in the home and that is their primary address for 2 out of the 5 years, whether you're married or divorced, if he still stays on the mortgage and is on the deed, when I go to sell, we get the 250 instead of just me 250.
Just the
So,
250.
right, because we haven't done the transfer of the deed. We haven't done, and I never was going to take on the assumption of the mortgage. He was always going to stay on the mortgage for 2 additional years, even though I'm selling. So we actually get the tax benefit of $500,000 of no capital gains tax on top of all the capital improvements that we made in the house.
For the
So
basis, right?
yeah, so those are the bases. So there was all these things I had to consider, and I was not the finance person in the marriage. I knew how to make money, I just didn't manage the finances. So when you talk about like all of a sudden being thrown in to do all of this, working with a CDFA, working with a financial advisor who's educating you and who has patience and who really can just gosh, I hate to say it, but just dumb it down. Like, I'm not like, this was all new to me. I had to really have a good team. I had to have somebody really guiding me, being like, yes, Tanya, this is the right thing for you to do. Good intuition, because if you do this, it's going to look like that. And yeah, I mean, I think I've got a good business sense, but yet I also just needed somebody to check the box and say, like, yeah, these are good decisions you're making. Is this going to be better for you financially? And it's really hard emotionally to give up the family home. And my kids are really, honestly, they're very, my divorce was so amicable. So up until now, like everything has been hunky dory and really good. And like I said, we're nesting. So the kids never had to go back and forth. But this piece of it is causing a lot of uncertainty in terms of like, well, where are we going to have Christmas? You know,
Right.
and where are we going to do Thanksgiving? Because we do those holidays together. My ex and I do those holidays together. And so that's causing a whole other level of stress, right? I'm like feeling like I know this is the right thing for me to do. My financial advisors are saying, yes, right thing for you to do. But how are you going to flip this now so your family is good, you know? And home is where the heart is, and you got it. But when you have kids going off to college, and this is going to like hit on like a chord with a lot of individuals, they're not home much.
Right.
So it's like, they might be home for a few weeks over Christmas, and depending on where they are in college, are they still coming home in the summers or are they not? And, how big of a house do you need to get? What kind of place do you want to rent? Do I buy? Do I rent? All these questions. And so tell me, like, tell me about like your experience with this. So you can actually coach me one to one right here.
Well, you start thinking, well, you're bringing up actually all the points that you really need to kind of lay out and start thinking about. Like you said, okay, I may not need this house anymore. The kids are growing, so now we might be looking at, maybe the compromise is vacation holidays, right? Maybe you're going away, Christmas is, maybe it's not going to be home. Maybe you're going to, rent a cabin in the woods for Christmas. That's the discussion that has to happen. And then you're looking at, well, where do the finances fit in? So if I don't have the home, I don't have to worry about the expenses, the maintenance, the repair, all the improvements I need to make there. I'm going to rent. Well, okay, what money is it going to, how's all that going to play out? You're in a wonderful situation with a, amicable divorce where you guys can work together on that. And that's even, I mean, that's perfect because the two of you together can kind of work out, okay, how do we want this to look? And that's what it's about is there's no, too much of our business is, spreadsheets and numbers. Um, but it's really not about that. It's exactly like you said. You're sitting here thinking about the kids coming home and holidays. None of that has to do with There's nothing on the spreadsheet I could show you that's gonna make that decision. It's about what is it you're gonna get from that and the experience. And even you brought up the point where even if you're good at this, when you're going through a divorce, your mind is changing because the emotions, I mean, there's science to show that you don't make good decisions, during heavy emotions. So having someone just to kind of check in with and say, okay, I think I know what I'm doing, but I'm so whatever emotion it is, you've got someone to kind of go back on and say, I mean, how many people have you run across where they're, at one end of the spectrum or the other? I don't care, I just want it over. I want it done with, or the other person, well, I don't care, I'm going to fight to the last, which brings up, I told you I was divorced very early in my life. It was a very short marriage. There were no kids. And, one of the things I always kind of keep in the back of my mind is, one of the things we were fighting over was this it was literally a lamp, and it was, um, like, okay, I want that. No, you can't have the lamp. And I just, I remember because it's such a perfect example of, I look at it now and I couldn't even tell you
What the
I mean,
lamp look?
what it looked like, or I don't even know why I wanted it. I don't even remember. I don't know. Maybe it looked good where it was or whatever, but that's it. It's like, you know, why did I even want? And it was because the whole reason is it had nothing to do with the lamb. And sometimes when you're sitting down and I'm sitting down with people and we're going through, like you said, especially with the assets and you're talking about divisions and stuff, some of these things will come up, and then, I'll recognize them as, okay, all right, that's a lamp scenario there. And you're able to avoid it because then we can address that and say, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this. Like, why is this so important to you? Or what's going on with this? Or in the other hands, we're always looking, if I'm usually work, I don't usually do neutral. So I'm always looking at the other side, and I'll ask for input. Tell me, why do they want that? What's the emotions behind it? What's the attachment? Okay, well, if we know they're going to fight really hard for that, well, what happens if we give that to them? Is there something else we can get? Like, because, is that worth the battle? Or maybe we can leverage it to, where's where's your lamp? And we can trade it back and forth. And that's really what I try to do is it's not so much about the numbers and the spreadsheets. It's about coming to reasonable conclusion. It's such a hard time, and it's such a difficult, no matter how good you are at it, it's hard.
No, and there's always thoughts that sit before the feelings, right? And sometimes individuals who are feeling a certain way. So, an example would be like, I'm feeling like I'm not getting the equitable distribution 2 years later for what was doing. And it comes across as this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling frustrated. Well, you're feeling frustrated because your thoughts or your beliefs or your stories you're telling yourself is like, this wasn't fair, right? This wasn't fair. And therefore, you're feeling frustrated or you're feeling, something. So you have the ability to change the story that you're telling yourself. It is fair because the law stated that at some point in time, we made this division of assets and we came to an agreement. And what happens after that, right? Happens after that, and it's unpredictable. It could go in either direction. So one person could end up in a better situation than the other, and there's no control over it. I know that when my father got divorced from his second wife, apparently they didn't get some paperwork signed properly on the house when they like changed over the deed. So when he went to sell the house, he needed her signature. So he went back to her and said, "Hey, do you mind just signing this? It looks like we didn't do it right the first time." She goes, "Oh, I'll sign it if you give me $65,000." And he's like, "Why?" And she's like, "Well, because when we divided the assets, I took this annuity and this annuity didn't do anything." And so she was like negotiating for the fact that the thing that she had gotten didn't grow like she had anticipated. But that's just what it is. Like, it is what it is. And I know that, even in my own marriage, like I said, amicable as it is, like he's frustrated, because I got the long stick and he got the short stick. Not when we divided the assets. It was all equitable, but now my stick has grown and his has not. And so I can sense by the way that he communicates, with me that there are certain things that he just believes that I should just not make him pay for anymore, right? Because like I'm already doing so much better. And to be honest, to keep it amicable, I'm compassionate around that. You know what? We had agreed we were going to split all the repairs that needed to get done before the house was going to get, that needed to get done. We would just split those repairs by a certain date. If they weren't done and he didn't want to fix them, we would get a bid and we would split the cost. Well, knowing that the house went up so much in value and I just said, "Oh, don't worry, I got it." And I just said, "Don't worry, I got it." And well, I only said that after he's like, "Well, the fireplace insert shouldn't go with the house and the pellet stove shouldn't go with the house and the washer dryer shouldn't go with the house. We should get values on those. And then when you sell the house, we should split those costs." I was like, "Oh my gosh, we're selling the house with all of the fireplaces and all of the thing." I was like, "What are you asking me to do here? I'm not going to remove those before I sell the house, or I'm not going to say those things are not included." And so I just said, I was going to just waive all of those costs that, we agreed to pay. So in a very non-conflict way, I just said, I was going to waive. I understand where you're coming from. Some houses don't sell with those. I need to sell the house with those. So we have a choice as like, I will either waive your need to pay 50% of the repairs, or we can get an appraisal on like those two things, figure out what the cost would be in a used product, and I'll subtract the 50% of that value from the overall cost of the repairs. I was like, so it's up to you. Of course, the me paying for the repairs is a much better deal for him, and it was going to alleviate. But again, you just have to you have to meet them where they are. Like if that's their thought, you have to meet them where they are and come up with a solution. Don't attack, don't threaten, just be solutions oriented. Okay, I understand. I'm listening to the way this guy's feeling or the way she's feeling. How can I be more accommodating for those feelings and not in and be compassionate, at that level? Again, like, I just think that some people just don't wanna go there and create conflict, and we
No,
don't need to.
exactly. It's all about being reasonable. And I mean that, like you said right there, that the whole negotiation, it's a matter of you can't look at divorce. You're never going to win a divorce, right? It's a case that you're not going to win. There is no winning the divorce case. And you have to understand that from the beginning. I tell my clients, you're not going to get justice. So as much as you feel wronged and all these things, if those feelings are there, you're not going to get that. The approach you want is you want to be reasonable, because if you can't decide between the two of you, and you need to be reasonable to come to, a reasonable decision between the two of you, you're going to give it to a stranger to make that decision as to what's going to happen. And you definitely don't want to be seen in the light of being the unreasonable one. So right from the beginning, you always want to have that approach of what we're doing is we're looking out for, you want to make sure you're taken care of, but you don't want to have the attitude that, oh, I'm going to win, or, I need to do this, or I'm getting back at someone. It's very rarely going to work out in your best interest to have that attitude. And more often than not, it's going to hurt your cause right on through the whole process. And what you described there is exactly how a negotiation should go, because it's like, okay, I'm not giving away the farm here. I'm going to stand on this, but if we do this, this, and this, I get what you're saying and I understand how you're feeling. Here's a solution that, you're not happy. It's not the best solution. There's no win-win there, right? It's not the best for you. He's not getting what he wants, but does it avoid any further, like, okay, can we settle it this way? That's a reasonable conclusion. And that's all you got to do is just, and kudos to you for being able to do that and hold that. And probably because it's been a little bit, but in the heat of the battle, that's the hard part, and that's where, the professionals, your support team comes in, someone like myself on the financial team with the numbers, the attorney's got your back on the legal stuff. And, I can't say enough for like the divorce coach and, helping really support that emotional side of things and saying, no, you've got to stand up for yourself, but you can't go too far and you can't go in the other direction and get things going in the right direction. That's why I keep saying like the legal, the financial, and the emotional, they're intertwined. No matter the situation. But that's a great example.
Yeah, so this has been great, Michael. I really appreciate your time today. And at the end of all of my episodes, I always do like three top tips in terms of things that I got out of the episode and just talking to you. So the first thing that I got out of our conversation today is start early. Working with a CDFA, working with somebody right at the beginning, even if you're contemplating divorce, it's really important to understand where you are and where your starting point is. And especially if you're trying to also get yourself organized, because staying organized through the divorce process is just so important. So, understanding where your starting point is, getting yourself organized, and making sure that you have an individual who you can be confiding in this process, because even sometimes we didn't talk about this, is just gathering the information, like where to go find all those things if you haven't been the
Yeah.
one who's been managing. So that is tip number one. So, and tip number two is that there isn't like the kind of person that would use a CDFA, meaning that everybody can use one in this divorce process, and how you use them might be different, meaning that Michael, for instance, will work with you on an hourly basis, and he might not have to work with you throughout the entire process, but he also can work with you if you are wanting a more deeper connectivity in terms of not only just working through the divorce, but as you move forward and beyond divorce, becoming a financial advisor for you, being able to make sure you've got the right insurance policies, etc. So again, there's like, that's the second tip. Like, there isn't just a type of person that needs a CDFA. Everybody going through divorce can use one. And the third one was just what you said at the end. There is no winning in divorce. You cannot stick it to them in the court of law. It is just, I understand there's an emotional piece of it. So get a coach and make sure that you're processing your emotions properly, because the only person that's going to suffer is you if you really begin to believe that this divorce process is going to inflict pain on another individual. And Michael just said it so beautifully. It is just not about winning and losing. It's about dividing things equitably. It's about feeling good about having the right support system to make sure that you are doing it equitably and that you feel good about the agreement. There is always going to be concessions. There are always going to be compromise. You are not going to end up with everything that you want. And that is something 100% of divorce professionals will tell you. But it is not the place to try to win, because it will cost you more money if you're going to move forward in that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, Michael, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on the Better Than Bitter podcast. And everybody who is listening in, Michael can be found on mydivorcesolutions.com. Everything will be in the show notes for you to connect with Michael. And I am looking forward to making sure that all of you feel supported in your divorce process moving forward.
Thank you so much, Tanya.